Let's talk about Beergate. Now, I have to say, I was one of those people who basically dismissed out of hand as a right-wing desperate attempt to deflect from Partygate, which obviously engulfed the government with pretty politically disastrous consequences. And I feel like an idiot now, to be honest. And I think this is actually quite revealing, partly because actually Labour bet the house on this, because Labour's whole shtick under Starmer was, we're going to be, the dividing lines are integrity, honesty, it's a test of character almost, rather than having transformative policies to deal with the cost of living crisis. Now, let's just explain. Let's just quickly go through why I'm an idiot, basically. Let's just listen. Let's just see what the latest Keir Starmer interview where he's doing this.
As I've explained a number of times, I was working in the office. We stopped for something to eat. There was no party. There was no breach of the rules. I'm confident about that. Police have obviously got to do their job. But meanwhile, I'm here in Scotland because we've had a fantastic set of results, the best results for 10 years, coming second in Scotland. There's a smile on all of our faces, and we've taken this council. So Labour is very clearly back on the pitch, and we're turning the corner, and now we're marching towards that general election.
Yeah. Dear me. So basically, the reason I feel like a complete idiot, I thought we had the ops note, but an ops note has been published, which shows very clearly that this was a pre-planned dinner, which was planned for 1 hour 20 minutes. A staffer is briefing. I know people be like, "Oh, they're briefing the right-wing media." Fine, I'm fine for people to say that, to be honest with you. But nonetheless, a staffer is briefing that no work was done afterwards. Now, what Keir Starmer, the reason I defended him is in interviews, he kept saying that, "Oh, we were working and then we stopped very briefly to have some food and carried on." Now, what Joe Morn, the lawyer, we've interviewed him on the show several times. First, whether or not you think the investigation is politically motivated, I think there were proper questions which arise for Starmer's team. And it seems, he says, plainly right, Durham police should investigate them. That they should, he says, investigate Cummings, but two wrongs don't make a right. And he said he really wouldn't want to be placing a bet that Starmer hasn't broken the law. So he thinks it's entirely possible that he's broken the law. Why is this important? Well, I mean, Rishi Sunak, let's be honest, Rishi Sunak's political career was destroyed by turning up to a meeting early to have, and he didn't know there was going to be a birthday and having some birthday cake. If we're going to be honest, that's what happened. But you see, Labour went for him on that viciously and aggressively and succeeded in scalping him. Now, if you've got the Labour leadership who went so hard on this, and it's clear that they had, when they were campaigning, they had a social event indoors, not with people in their own bubble, which is what the law allowed for at the time, and they didn't work, which is what staffers are briefing the newspapers. Well, he's cocked, isn't he?
Owen, it's one staffer, and you're wrong. The operations note proves that it was a work event. It was because work.
It's a work event if they're having it. What, it allowed for social events for people outside of?
No, it says nothing to do with a social event. Mary Foy was there as part of the event. One, and two, that work stops at the end of the day after the dinner. That would, to me, prove that, number one, that it was a work event, and I think that's the reason that whatever. Yes, the Tories have managed to knock Labour off the news cycle that they want, the agenda they wanted. Yes. It's given some ammunition to the right-wing press, and it is, of course, a right-wing.
Paul, this is what the Tories. You're literally regurgitating what the Tories said about their events. Well, you're saying the same thing they did.
I don't care, because the point is, Keir hasn't broken the law.
How do you know that? Why does Jolyon Morn think they might have broken the law, and he's a lawyer and you don't?
Jolyon Morn's Twitter thing starts with the thing, I don't know much about this. Okay.
No, he didn't say that. He said he didn't. No, he didn't say that. He said he had.
Let's not have an argument about him. Let's have an argument about Keir. Keir, it's quite clear that they didn't break the law because it was a work event. Number one. This source briefing the Times, very interesting, isn't it? One source doesn't brief that Keir broke the law at all. This source has a grudge against Mary Foy, okay? And for people in the Labour movement, that might give you you don't want to jigsaw identify.
But I don't think we're going to do a character assassination now on someone.
No, I'm going to do a character assassination of a source who's not been revealed.
Well, I know. I think source, exactly. So we can't. We don't know who he is, so we can't do that.
But the Times said that the Times reported that the mail was being held by people or a person who was from the left and didn't like Starmer. Fine. Well, the police will take that into account. I think Starmer will come out of this with increased moral authority. He'll be proved innocent. And so that's my prediction.
Maybe he will. Maybe he will.
Yeah,
Michael,
so why would we, the left, join in some kind of Tory-initiated right-wing pylon that's only there to distract from the issue of cost of living and all the other fuck-ups that they're doing?
Michael, are we essentially being Tory stooges by indulging this? And do you think Keir Starmer has been honest?
Oh, well, I mean, I think it depends what you do. So I was thinking about the difference between sort of what some on the left are doing now vis-a-vis Starmer and what some on the right did vis-a-vis Jeremy Corbyn. And I do think, you know, if I were to get a spot on Question Time this week or whatever, I wouldn't have a question thrown at me about whether Keir Starmer would be a good prime minister when it comes to the economy and say, no, this guy's dishonest because he potentially lied about some curry he had in Durham once. And that was the kind of thing that the right were doing to Jeremy Corbyn. You know, there was different issues of the day, and they were booking their 10 p.m., their 8 a.m. slot on the Today programme to trash him and say the real issue here is anti-Semitism, blah, 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 blah. If there was anyone on the left who was doing that, it was sort of like hogging the camera to make every sort of potential good news story for Labour one about Keir Starmer having a curry and a beer in Durham in 2021. I do think that would be a problem, and I do think you could very reasonably say you're doing the Tories' job for them in the same way that Margaret Hodge was doing the Tories' job for them back in 2019. I think it's a very different story when you've got people who are essentially just doing commentary on Twitter and are refusing to fall in line with and do Starmer's job for him, essentially. Because for me, the issue here is I'm not a lawyer, right? I don't know if the law was broken. My understanding is the question isn't just was it a work event, it's was it an event which was reasonably necessary for work? And so the argument which Jolyon Moore is putting forward, and he's a lawyer, I'm not a lawyer, he's saying all the facts that I can see in front of me, it looks like this is probably not reasonably necessary for work. There are other, you know, QCs. I've seen Adam Wagner do a thread where he's saying, no, potentially this was reasonably necessary for work. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I haven't pored over the regulations. But I think what seems to me to be the case is that there's a high chance, you know, a non-negligible chance that Keir Starmer gets a fine from this. And I do think if he gets a fine from this, he's going to have to resign. And that's not
David
because
Bower asked it. Yeah. Do you think
that's
Starmer
not
will
because
resign
what he's done is morally equivalent to Boris Johnson? I think we should be absolutely clear. Boris Johnson's fine was an indication that he'd taken part in a pattern of behaviour which was deeply offensive to anyone who'd suffered during COVID-19. Keir Starmer hasn't done that. But what Keir Starmer has done is stood up and said, because Boris Johnson is being investigated by the police, he should resign. Now, the defence there is, oh, he was talking within a context of Boris Johnson having broken all of these laws and it being horrendous. Fair enough. I think, you know, it's awkward for him, but I think you can plausibly make that case. The Rishi Sunak thing one, I don't, because Rishi Sunak did just turn up to a meeting a bit early. There was a birthday cake, right? It wasn't particularly offensive to the victims of COVID-19, but he got fined, and Keir Starmer said that's enough that you should resign. If Keir Starmer now gets fined in an event which I agree I don't find particularly offensive, you know, I don't think that was an FU to the victims of COVID. But if he gets fined and he's called for Rishi Sunak to resign over exactly the same thing, I don't see how he can maintain his position as leader of the Labour Party without becoming a national object of ridicule.
I mean, that's true, isn't it, Paul? David Barrett says if he doesn't resign, what damage will his hypocrisy do to the party?
I think, like I say, I don't think he's going to be found guilty. And one, I don't think he's going to be found in breach of the law. Two, the Durham police do not issue retrospective fines, because if they did, they'd have to fine Dominic Cummings as well. So again, if it were me, here's what I say. I'm a class fighter. You know, I see this as a complete setup job by the right-wing media to distract from the fact that that Labour is actually advancing, that the Tories are in trouble. And so if it were me, one option would be to say, yes, of course, we did call for all these people to resign. If the Durham police have been bounced into a investigation by a bunch of false information and then found me guilty, and then revived, making me the only person that they've ever retrospectively fined, I see that as a political attack, as political policing, and I would fight back. No, I don't think it's. I don't think it's
exactly the same as the Metropolitan Police and Rishi Sunak, though. No, I mean they weren't going to. They initially said we're not going to do a retrospective investigation.
But Labour is not responsible for the Metropolitan Police. It's not responsible for the timing or the decision when they decided to.
They backed it. They said this is a great thing and they should resign because the investigation is open. So it would.
Why is it, Paul? Paul, just
Remember
quickly, the Tories suggested that the Metropolitan Police had been bounced into doing their investigation by political pressure. That's what.
Hold on a minute. The Sue Gray report, which originated as the Cabinet Secretary's report, i.e., the investigation, was already underway. So the point is that there was a pattern of proven law breaking, unproven, self-admitted, allegra stratum. 1, 2, there's an investigation going on into it, and in many ways, the Met intervention puts the stymie on that investigation. I still think that investigation would be what finishes Johnson. 3, Johnson then lied to Parliament, which is something that Starmer hasn't done. And so what we must be really careful about is not erecting moral equivalences between these things when he hasn't even been found guilty and can't be fined and without a major act of political policing.
Let's move on from that. In a sense, Beergate, for me, I'm not that personally invested, as I've already said. And I think the point that you make about lying, I think this is really important. And I think we need to get to this point. And it's not a discussion that the media has had for very fascinating reasons. Boris Johnson is an epic liar. I mean, lying is woven into the very fabric of his being. His whole political career is based on deceit. And as I said, I don't think he knows the difference between truth or lies himself, though I'll spare everyone the cod psychology. But that doesn't mean Keir Starmer isn't himself a fundamentally dishonest politician, because he is, isn't he, Paul? His whole leadership campaign, and I think we need to talk about this because I think it's about where Labour goes from here, is the most dishonest leadership campaign in the history of British democracy. No leader has ever stood for leadership of their party and won and marched so dramatically in the opposite direction. Tony Blair didn't say he was going to revise Clause 4 when he stood for leader, but he damn well made clear which direction his leadership was going to go in. Now, what Starmer did is he said he was going to be basically Corbynism without Corbyn. And what he's offering now is Blairism without Blair and indeed the charisma. And I'm just interested in this, Paul, because I'm not saying this to have a go, because I just think this is where we go from here. Just in terms of what you said at the time, because I think this is a discussion we never had. And John Maynard Keynes said, when the facts change, I change my views. What do you do, sir? And I've had to be held account for things I've got very wrong, as everyone knows. This is what you said in the leadership campaign, and I want to see if you've changed your opinion. Okay. So you said, if you don't think Keir Starmer would advance the class struggle, you're possibly not understanding social democracy correctly from a Marxist perspective. You said that Keir is firmly on the left, albeit a different left than the Corbyn-McDonald tradition. I think we can all agree on that. He will stick by the economic radicalism of 2015 to 2019. Above all, Green New Deal, rejecting austerity and fighting for a new economic model. And you also, that's the same one. But you said very clearly at the time that he was and you said, the other tweet that I don't have is that he was not going to purge the left. Yeah. Now, in the Sunday Times last week, Keir Starmer hints expulsion for Labour's NATO skeptic MPs. And that is within Keir Starmer's office. His advisors, who are all a bunch of Blairites now, because all the lefties that they kept for the leadership campaign in order to dupe people on the left into voting Keir Starmer, they're gone. They've been basically lost by attrition. He is intellectually, apparently, sold on kicking out 11 left-wing MPs. And I predicted last year, with you both here, that they would do this, because that they would end up saying, we'll end up relying on these left-wing MPs in a hung parliament. And they don't want to do that, so they'll kick them out. And they're already talking about doing that. Isn't it just the case, Paul? You got this one wrong. Keir Starmer, whatever is going on in his head, his project is a new Labour revanchist project. It's the hard right of the Labour Party, and they want the left permanently buried and exiled. And their economic programme, such as it is a tinkering around the edges, which is why they went on hard on Partygate, because they don't have any transformative policies.
So that's a long list of things. I think the first thing is to come back to your original point. Is he a fundamentally dishonest politician? No, I don't think so. I think he's true to his values. I know what his values are. I described them at the time in all the stuff that I've written. They are basically left Rawlsian liberalism. He is a Rawlsian liberal in the sense that he believes in social justice and the state as a way to deliver it. That's basically what it is. Now, Let's come to bit by bit through this. Okay, so what did I get wrong? Did I get things wrong? First of all, that Marxism from a Marxist viewpoint was a wind up to this. I don't want to use pejorative terms about people, but someone who is not in touch with reality, called Joshua Y. Jackson. And if you look at it's a reply, right? It's not a tweet saying it's a reply to this guy's mania. And I think no, it is let's take the things he's done. I'm not going to defend everything about what he's done, but one thing that he and Rachel Reeves, who's more to the right of Labour than he is, have done is deliver a Green New Deal style fiscal offer, the 28 billion a year. That's a big thing, and it was something that was fought for inside Labour, and I think it gives us on the left a shell of money which we can fill with radical proposals. That's one thing. The purging of the left, let's move to that. Okay, what did he do wrong? First of all, he took a series of stupid and needless whipping decisions that forced people like Nadia Whittome and Olivia Blake and all the rest of them out of the shadow, out of their front bench roles, their PPS roles, and some shadow cabinet ministers. And then number two, I think the way he handled the Rebecca Long Bailey thing was needless, and another example of trying to push Corbynites out. That's another thing. So I disagree fundamentally with the way he has handled the left. As to whether it's Keir who's pushing for those 11 MPs to go, I'd say probably not. I think not.
You said he was definitely not going to purge the left, Paul, in the leadership.
Wait a minute. On the specifics, it's more people to the right of him. Indeed, the people who are pushing for the 11. Remember that those 11, I think, got duped into signing an absolutely disgraceful petition. I've heard other left MPs say will probably end their careers full stop, because how can you trust them if you are a anti-NATO, pro-Putin leftist? How could you ever trust them ever again? But I don't want them. I want them to be in. I want them to stop signing Stop the War petitions and become a far more vibrant left. Number one, I think the left has walked into a bunch of purges, to be honest. When we talk about purging the left, people who almost as if they stand up and sort of arms spread, shout, "Shoot me now," by tweeting stuff that they know is going to get them expelled. I think that's for them to decide. In the end, I think there is too much discipline. There is too much use of disciplinaries. I'm certainly against the prescription of workers' liberty. I'm certainly against the prescriptions of some of the other groups. And yeah, we are at war for democracy. But remember, it's not just Keir. There's a right wing to the right of him that's lining up to get rid of him. And I think, like some of the people on the left today, they would be highly delighted if he had to resign as a result of Beergate, because they're lining up and raising funds already.
So, Michael, we're going to run out of time. So, Michael, what's No, it's fine. It's I asked a very long, rambling question. Michael, in terms of just the honesty of Keir Starmer, because I mean, the argument I would say is, it's the media, I would say, let him get off the hook for the most, as I said, dishonest leadership campaign in the history of British democracy. If people can find a more dishonest leadership campaign, I'd love to hear it. But because those on the receiving end were the left, and we're not legitimate political actors. You can do what you want to the left. That's fine. That's how British politics works. But now they're trying to do him over on potentially a much, much smaller dishonesty, aren't they? So what's your just response to what what Paul said and about the honesty of Keir Starmer?
I mean, I suppose we can talk about honesty. I mean, I think his honesty speaks for itself. He will say one thing one day and say another thing the other. I agree with what you've said, that the media don't care about the leadership election being a scam because they don't see the left as legitimate political actors. Potentially now, because he's made truthfulness and integrity sort of the only thing he stands for, it would be a pretty ridiculous reason to have to resign as leader of the Labour Party for having a curry and a beer. But I wouldn't shed a tear for him. I suppose the thing I want to push back on, just because I feel like it's an important thing to say given who's going to be watching this show, is I do think it's pretty not cool, essentially, to say that the people who've been expelled from the Labour Party basically waved a flag and said, "Please expel me." Now, I don't know all of the cases. I'm sure we could go through all of the various ones, and there are different things we could disagree about. But the one that sort of stands out to me most is Pamela Fitzpatrick. She was sort of like a very impressive campaigner for welfare rights. I remember going campaigning for her with my mum, who also works in welfare rights. She was like,
I campaigned for her.
Brilliant. She started I think it's the Harrow Law Centre, stood to be General Secretary of the Labour Party. Exactly the kind of person who you want to be sitting on the Labour benches. She gets expelled for having a meeting once with Socialist Action before Socialist Action were prescribed. Now, if your response to that is to say, well, she probably asked for it,
Socialist
I
appeal.
do think you've potentially lost your way a little bit, and I think it is an issue of respect. I think fair enough to say, look, a few unjust suspensions. If what they're going to do is 28 billion a year in a Green New Deal, like, we can disagree about how plausible that is, but I think fine, it's fair enough to say he's done these bad things, but I want this money invested into the green economy. But to sort of turn around and say, if you've been expelled from the Labour Party in the past 2 years, you probably asked for it, I think is not really, we shouldn't really let it pass.
No, I'm not saying that of everybody, but there are some, and they are the loudest ones. Panel Fitzpatrick, I take the point. There are others. Again, all the retrospective justice. What I would prefer is to bring in natural and indeed legal justice to the Labour Party. This is why the rule change they're bringing in is so pernicious. They're trying to get natural justice out of the Labour Party. I think we should all have a right to sue for our ability to be members. I think what the investigations into JVL have been a disaster as well. So I'm not trying to defend the purges. I'm against them. I'll fight against them on an individual basis. But I mean, pragmatically,
unless someone signed a petition against NATO, potentially.
No. What I'd say about that is that it's not signing a petition against NATO. It's signing a petition blaming NATO for a war on the eve of which a guy invades and starts genociding the Ukrainian people. You can, if you think it's going to be fun going on the doorstep with an MP who's done that, then it'll be much worse than what it was in parts of the Midlands with Corbyn. It's just going to be awful. And I think that I would question the judgment of everybody who did it. I don't want to expel them. I want to hear from them what they've learned, actually. For me, the most important thing that happens in the world is this horrific conflict, and getting it so badly wrong as a Labour MP. And by the way, we're not just dealing with the left people, we're dealing with people on the Tory right, we're dealing with Labour MPs who turn out to have taken £500,000 from China.
I have to say, but isn't that just quickly? It's the double standards, isn't it? I mean, loads of Tory Labour MPs have gone to Saudi Arabia, paid for by the Saudi regime. They shill for the Saudi dictatorship as it carpet bombs Yemen. They support the Turkish regime. Like, I mean, this is hypocrisy, though, isn't it? The standards.
Well, the one who supported the Turkish regime is now a Tory peer, isn't he? So it kind of
good point.
Yeah. And you've got a Labour leader who says, "Oh, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, and Amnesty International all say Israel is apartheid." I disagree with them. Actually, it's a beacon of democracy. Now, I don't want to go on a doorstep with that guy, but can you make disciplinary decisions based on that? Well, but that was your argument for why someone signing a NATO letter you disagree with should be kicked out of the party.
Yeah,
where are you drawing the line? Why are you drawing the line exactly where the right-wing press do? Essentially, is what I'm asking.
Well, it's not just where the right-wing press would do. I think it's where any decent socialist would do.
But why would they draw it there and not apartheid Israel? That's what I'm saying.
Because the Labour Party has a strong Zionist tradition. In fact, a mainstream Zionist tradition, and always has had. I'm not a Zionist.
But it's not about Zionism or not. It's about, do you recognise the systematic violation of human rights? You can be a Zionist and still think Israel is an apartheid state.
There are Zionists who think that.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So why the difference? Because Ukraine is a war which has just started and is killing. So, I'm sorry. No,
occupation. Just because the occupation of Palestine, because it's happened for decades.
You're telling me that anybody who supports the state of Israel, is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Should not be going on the doorstep for Labour. Be very careful. Be very careful with that.
No one has said that remotely, Paul. So the issue you're making is, so you're saying that NATO potentially provoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
They didn't say potentially. They said NATO was responsible.
So let's start. So saying NATO provoked the war in Ukraine, which I think there's some truth to. I mean, I probably wouldn't. I don't think that letter was particularly well drafted, but signing it is not a red line for me. And if it were, I think I'd find it very difficult to justify it being a red line for me, and it not be a red line for me that Keir Starmer not said, I believe there should be a state of Israel. He has said that these 3 of the leading human rights organizations in the world have come out, one of them Israeli, and have said that Israel is an apartheid state because it does these different things. He said, no, I don't agree with that. No, I think boycott, divest, and sanctions would be terrible. And that, while I accept you disagree with him there, you disagree with him on that, but you think that's perfectly reasonable and he should be leader of the Labour Party. A backbencher signed something about NATO that you disagree with, and you think that they should be expelled. And what I find interesting is that the only explanation I can find for drawing that line, but not that line, is that one of them is seen as acceptable by the political establishment, by Keir Starmer and the mainstream press.
No, you see, this is the Putin talking point, isn't it? Supporting Ukraine is racist. You know, everybody who supports Ukraine is really doing it because they don't support Yemen, because they don't support Palestine.
This is not remotely what I've said in any way whatsoever.
Understand, Mike, that is the logic that behind the point you're making.
No, it's not. Paul, can I just quickly sum up what Michael is saying here? He's saying if you're going to say that people who suggested NATO expansion played a role in the invasion of Ukraine, they said it did. Right, okay. They shouldn't be in the Labour Party.
I'm just saying they should withdraw their names.
No. We're not talking about people supporting the state of Israel. There are lots. Jeremy Corbyn supports the two-state solution. You could lump him in that. Okay, we're not talking about people about supporting the right of the state of Israel to exist. Yeah. That's not the discussion we're having. It's about Israel being described as an apartheid state by the.
I would describe it. It as an
okay. State. But the point that Michael is making is, why should it be possible for it to be perfectly permissible and acceptable and legitimate to deny the apartheid regime that does exist in Israel, according to Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and B'Tselem, and that's fine to be in the Labour Party. But if you say the wrong thing about Ukraine, you're out. Why? What's the difference?
There's a difference.
What's the difference?
Yeah, there's a difference. It's not saying the wrong thing about Ukraine. It's having.
I think it's wrong, by the way. I don't. By the way, I think Russia is ruled by a despicable, kleptocratic, gangster, chauvinist regime, and de-Ukrainization, all the rhetoric that they have makes it very clear where they stand. But Israel is an apartheid state, and the leader of the Labour Party quoted a racist quote by Harold Wilson, I have to say, about how Palestine was a. What did he say? It was like it was a desert where where nothing was there.
They made the desert bloom because Arabs can't grow things.
That was racist, blatant racism. So why is it possible for Keir Starmer to deny the apartheid nature, which Amnesty and Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem say it is, and that's fine and acceptable, but you're beyond the pale on Ukraine for the reasons you've described? Why?
Well, okay, just let me explain it to you. It is entirely legitimate within the Labour Party for there to be a range of opinions on Israel, some which I would not share, okay, which massively support Israel, you know, everything it does, criticize it in its own terms. Keir's position I wouldn't share, right the way through to an anti-Zionist position that I think or non-Zionist position that many of the left would put, and certainly all the Jewish Voice for Labour people who are still in the party.
Who they want to purge.
Yeah, of course, yeah, okay, but that's entirely. I want to fight for a party where it's legitimate remember what I said before. It's mainstream tradition of the Labour Party has been to support Israel. That's been its mainstream. If you want a party that has never supported it and does not, okay, that's going to be a different party. With Ukraine. So here's a contrast, right? A range of opinions, an alliance of people around progressive goals can have different opinions on Israel. They cannot have different opinions on a genocidal war being perpetrated against a people who are in their thousands.
Just quickly, Paul, because I've got to go to a wedding and I'm going to get killed if I don't finish the stream as a result. But just quickly, do you think that all Labour figures who support arming Saudi Arabia, who are on record supporting arming Saudi Arabia as it carpet bombs Yemen, I'm including people who've supported selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, like Luke Akers, who sits on the National Executive Committee. And I also mean dozens, and we're talking dozens of Labour MPs who voted in 2016. They defied the whip when Jeremy Corbyn put down a motion, or they can't remember, the motion was on arming Saudi Arabia. Do you think they should be kicked out of the Labour Party? If you support what? No. What? Oh, okay. Yemen is the biggest humanitarian crisis on earth.
You do then, Owen. Are you saying Luke Akers should be kicked out of the Labour Party?
No, I'm not. You're the one who's saying people should be kicked out of the Labour Party if they've got the wrong views of foreign policy issues. What's the difference? Yemen's the worst humanitarian crisis on earth. They are murdering children in buses with bombs from Britain.
Some understanding here. There are many differences that are containable within the Labour Party, but for me, the difference that says NATO is the aggressor in the Ukraine crisis is not containable. Because Russia is waging a genocidal war.
Right. Okay. Why?
So that's my politics. That's my opinion. I think that's quite close to leadership.
Why is the life of a Yemeni so much lower than that of a Ukrainian?
Go again. So, Owen, this is the Putin talking point.
No,
supporting Ukraine is racist.
How dare you?
Supporting Ukraine is racist because anyone who supports Ukraine is raising Ukraine above brown people. That's the Putin talking point. And
I support Ukraine's just war of liberation against Russian aggression. I support arming Ukraine against Russian aggression, okay? On Yemen, where I've been to a Yemeni refugee camp, I've met Yemeni refugee children who drew pictures of their homes being bombed.
So you were asking me, what's the difference? There is no difference between the life of a Ukrainian and there's no difference.
So I'm asking you, why don't you support booting out Labour MPs who support arming a head-chopping, a dictatorship that beheads people like myself for being gay and Michael, that brutalises women, that exports international extremism and carpet bombs Yemen? Why are those people in the broad church of the Labour Party legitimate political actors and the people you're describing in Ukraine aren't? Why?
It's sad that they exist. It's sad that they have that position. I don't know how many of them there actually are.
Dozens.
But, okay, dozens. Right. Okay, it's sad, but it's not the same. Okay, it's not the same.
Why?
Why? Right. Because well, one, we Labour are a party whose commitment to NATO is unshakable. It's non-negotiable.
But whatever you babe. But what's that got to do with this? What's it got to do with the value of life? It's a military organisation. The sanctity of NATO is more important than anything else.
No. The value of all lives are equal for me.
Good. I'm glad we've established it.
Okay, so
but Labour tradition values some lives more than other, and we have to be bound by Labour tradition.
No, that's nothing to do with Labour tradition. Labour's tradition on NATO is that we're part of NATO, and you cannot go on the doorstep with people who have wrongly and falsely, echoed the propaganda talking points of a guy who has unleashed a genocidal war.
Right.
You can go on the doorstep with people who have not just echoed the talking points of the leaders of Saudi Arabia, but have actively gone there and supported sending the precise wars which are killing people in Yemen.
That's the party you joined. I mean, sorry,
there's only two parties in it. There's one party that can get into government. If your argument is you have to accept that in this party, nothing is about righteousness, nothing is about justice. What it is about is these are the set parameters of the party. It's a party that supported colonialism quite recently. It's a party that went to the war in Iraq very recently. And so what we're going to do is when we're assessing who should be in it and who should not be in it, we're saying, is your relationship to foreign policy within the Labour tradition, and the Labour tradition being an incredibly imperialist and one which doesn't value lives equally. So I don't see how you can both say lives should be valued equally and we're going to let our sort of compassion towards people be sort of limited within that which has been valued within the Labour tradition. It just doesn't make any moral sense.
So it makes a lot of moral sense to me, but we're going around in circles. To me, I don't want Stalinism to be part of the Labour tradition. That's my position. I don't want. See, there was a communist.
You want Saudi apologism to be acceptable within the Labour tradition?
Listen, there was a communist party in the 1930s. It signed a pact. It advocated a pact with Hitler.
Why is this relevant?
It's got nothing to do with the Labour tradition. It would be much better for me, from my point of view, if we had an internationalist left, an internationalist centre, but having a Stalinist left that continually pollutes the image and perception of being left with its support for this guy in Moscow is not.
They're not even supporting the. I mean, anyway, I think we should.
I need to go. I need to go to a wedding.
Yeah, I think we should all. Yeah, but I mean, we're not going to agree on it. But
no, well, apparently, as I've said, if you're an apologist for a head-chopping regime which carpet bombs children, by the way, including children on a bus on the way back from a picnic.
I know how bad they are. I know how bad they are.
But they're fine in the Labour Party. The glorious.
It's not a question of fine. It's a question of what is social democracy, what are its basic and moral and political tenets.
Arming child murderers, apparently. Anyway, look, we need to end there. I've enjoyed this, by the way. It's good to have a passionate discussion, and it has been great. And I think you've both been very eloquently put your cases. So I really appreciate both of you. I've known you both for a very long time, and it's lovely to have you here. Go and get some sun. I know lots of people don't have sun. I looked up Stockport's weather where I'm from. It's cloudy. So I apologise to the people of my hometown for suggesting this is a glorious sunny day when it isn't in many parts of the world. All right. Lots of love, everyone. Really enjoyed it. And take care of yourselves. I'll speak to you soon.
Great.